So even though all the bigger individual components are finished, there was still a lot more work left to be done in order to finish the entire build off. For the exterior, there were still a couple of plastic trim pieces all around that still needed to be painted, so I first just sanded them down, removed all of the mold lines and some of the markings left from the sprues, then primed them and painted them flat black. For the wheels, I also printed a couple of new versions. These are the optional Aventador S wheels and also pretty much the same, or at least very similar to the Aventador SV wheels. And those were designed by my friend Casey over at Slowly's Models. I 3D printed them in a past video. These were again primed and painted at the same time. Alongside all of those other parts, the windows needs to be painted as well, or at least a black outline needs to be painted on them. There are some templates, pre-cut masking included in the kit for the main window parts, so these were installed first. Then some masking tape on the outside to prevent that from getting some overspray, and I then painted them in a couple light coats of black too. For the headlight buckets themselves, there were still a couple of details that needed to be added, mainly the decal for the LED strip in the front, and then these could all be glued in place and the main assembly could start. So instead of adding the glue to either parts prior to installing them, it is sometimes a lot easier just to install the parts dry without any glue, then hold them in place and add a little bit of glue later on to stick them from the outside and not have any seepage of glue or mess ups right there. It just saves a little bit. The taillights themselves are pretty interesting as well. They consist of multiple parts, a clear orange, clear red, and also a just transparent clear part, and they all need to be glued together and then installed into a silver backed or chrome backed bucket, which then also of course needs to be fitted into the body itself. The main body was painted two-tone and a lot of separate parts needs to be painted in a similar color scheme. Mainly all of those parts were for some of the vents and other pieces around the engine bay, and those were all painted gloss black to match the roof and then could be installed. These big air inlets on the back here could be installed in a both opened and closed position. There are some parts in the kit that needs to be installed if you want them to be opened. I decided just to go for the closed position. Same goes for the wing. You can have it in the up or down position. Some parts again are included. For this one, just a cleaner look, I wanted to have both of them in the down position or closed position to get the sleeker lines and not go as aggressive. For the main engine bay itself, there is one big black piece. Some smaller pieces need to be installed to it, a couple of clear parts and a little bit of detailing, and that can be glued in place too, along with some of the interior trim pieces. So as mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, I have built one of these Aventadors prior to this one. That was a couple of years ago. It is on the channel. That is one of the anniversary editions, and on that build I decided to glue the doors in prior to painting, prior to any assembly whatsoever, just to get clean lines along the doors and not have to mess with this. Now I know that all of these hinges and doors are pretty problematic and are not really that easy to assemble, and I of course found that out firsthand. I did try just to assemble them and have them working. One side worked out, the other didn't, but we'll get to that later. After installing the rear view mirror on the front windshield, I could move on to gluing all of the clear parts in. For this I'm using microscale crystal clear. This is a nice safe crystal clear glue that is used for clear parts. It is pretty strong, dries pretty quickly, and doesn't really leave a mess, and can easily be cleaned up with a bit of water if you do mess it up a little bit. For the tail and headlight lenses, I always like to add a small border around it with a black permanent marker to simulate the rubbers that are usually on these parts. So the wheels that I decided to use again are the ones that I 3D printed. There is a video on the channel about the entire process. They needed to be modified just a little bit to fit on the stock suspension. I drilled a small hole in the center hub on the wheel itself to fit them. They needed to be cut down a little bit here and there, and the pegs inside of the wheels needed to be cut too to create the correct offset. But after that was all done, they just slid on really easily and fit perfectly well. Now back to that door issue. So as I said, one worked out pretty well. I guess it isn't perfect, and the other one didn't. The doors just misaligned terribly. They don't really fit together all that well. So I just decided to glue this one shut, as if I don't keep it forced in there, it doesn't have a nice panel gap. So I'm just going to add a bit of glue, put it shut, and leave it there. So the door on the driver's side was a pretty big mess, and that is now glued shut with a nice panel gap. The other side worked out kind of okay, and is pretty cool that it does function. The panel gaps are not perfect, but with a functioning hinge in there, it is good enough. And certainly for some of these photos, to have the door in the open position, that is of course always a good look to have. A couple of final details needed to be glued on, like the rear view mirrors or the side mirrors, a couple of decals for in the door sill and also on the wheels, and then this one is finished. Overall, this was a pretty enjoyable build. Most of the parts fit together perfectly fine. As I said, the doors don't really work out as you'd like them to, so my advice would be just to glue them in place prior to painting and just have them in the closed position permanently, but have a nice panel gap. Now, if you do decide just to leave them in the open position for display purposes, that is also a good thing. But if you want to have them functional in the opened and closed position, it's not really that good of a look, as the panel gap isn't perfect, but that of course is up to personal preference. As it is displayed here with the door in the open position, it does look pretty cool, so it has its ups and downs and is totally up to you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video series, and I will see you on the next one.